Hello, and as you just said, welcome to Hands-on Activities for Librarians to Build Evidence Synthesis Competencies, presented by the University of Michigan Systematic Reviews Workshop instructors. 4 informationists from the Taubman Health Sciences Library make up the current Systematic Reviews Workshop instructor team. I'm Emily Capillary, and my fellow workshop instructors are Kate Saylor, Letisa James, and Catherine Vanderbilt. I'd like to give a big nod to Catherine, who proposed this session and put a lot of the content together. She's unable to be here today, but she's amazing. Between workshop offerings, the instructors work together to update the content based on trends in evidence synthesis work, participants' discussions and follow-up questions, and feedback that we receive through our internal workshop assessment form. During the live workshop, we always have 2 to 4 of the instructors in the room. In addition to helping facilitate activities, we each have unique perspectives and expertise to share during the discussions. We also want to give a huge shout out to colleagues that have helped make the workshop the course it is today. Mark, Marisa, and Nandita developed and taught the pilot workshop in 2013. After that, Whitney Townsend joined Mark as a workshop instructor, and together they refined the workshop's format and content and transitioned the asynchronous content and activities to a more effective online learning tool, from PBWorks to Canvas. Other colleagues have also made contributions to instructional design, guest lectures, assessment, and other activities throughout the workshop's history. The Systematic Reviews Workshop is a continuing education course for health sciences librarians that's approved for 20 credit hours by the Medical Library Association. It begins with 10 asynchronous modules with corresponding discussion boards and a search strategy project. The modules cover topics ranging from protocols and bias to core aspects of search strategy development. The online experiences focuses on establishing a really strong foundation and a shared baseline knowledge. We've found that interacting with each other for a month or more on Canvas before the live workshop also allows the cohort to get to know each other and begin building psychological safety for some of the upcoming discussions. The 12 hours of the live workshop are the heart of the course. Participants learn with and from each other during dynamic discussions and activities that cover best practices. They also grapple with some of the difficult realities of engaging in evidence synthesis work. In 2020, the workshop instructors revised our in-person activities so the live content could be delivered via Zoom, the pandemic. And then while the public health crisis and travel budgets were stabilizing, we continued to offer fully remote workshops through December of 2023. Since participants' engagement and connections with each other and the instructors are so much richer in person, we made a somewhat difficult decision to transition back to only offering the live workshop in person starting in 2024. Across 24 cohorts of the Systematic Reviews Workshop, we've taught 474 participants, of which 458 are from the United States. The participants from Australia and South Africa each participated in those fully remote offerings I mentioned. They worked around inconvenient time zone differences to participate in the live content on Zoom. Our 2 participants from the United Kingdom and 11 of the 13 from Canada have actually traveled to an in-person workshop, which is kind of cool. Our training has reached librarians working at institutions in 41 of 50 states. There are 2 states, Michigan and New York, with over 50 attendees across our 24 cohorts. Another 14 states have had 10 or more attendees. Those are California, Connecticut, Florida, Georgia, Illinois, Indiana, Massachusetts, Minnesota, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Texas, Utah, and Virginia. Woo! While the workshop is typically offered at the University of Michigan in our home state, we've taught the Roadshow workshop for librarians at 7 different host institutions, including 4 peer academic libraries and 3 that were coordinated through state library organizations. This has helped expand the geographic reach of the workshop. For this presentation, we have 2 main goals. We'd like to tell you about some of the hands-on activities we've developed and used at the workshop. We'd also like to share strategies for developing, adapting, and leading successful hands-on continuing education activities for evidence synthesis at either your home institution or professional community. We love training librarians through our workshop, but the truth is, we also believe the course works best with limited, intimate attendance numbers and a focus on health sciences evidence synthesis. Unfortunately, that means we just can't reach everybody. And even if you've gone through our workshop, we also don't believe that your continuing education and skill building should end there. So we hope this presentation inspires you. You may be asking, Emily, can I really lead continuing education activities? No matter who you are, my answer is yes, definitely. You can do this if you're very experienced in evidence synthesis, or even if you're closer to a beginner. The facilitator of a CE experience doesn't have to be the top expert on a topic. You don't have to necessarily present an answer. Instead, you can encourage conversations that could be even more valuable to learning than specific prepared content. For example, facilitating group discussions about an evidence synthesis challenge you're personally grappling with could help give you the benefit of advice from your peers, while your peers get to benefit from thinking through your dilemma and applying best practices to a real case. A decade ago, when I joined the instructor team, I used to stress about how I would respond if someone asked a direct question that I didn't know the answer to. Not knowing would mean I failed as an instructor, right? Wrong. I could lean on my co-instructors. As I mentioned, we have 2 to 4 in the room at any time. At the time, it was Mark and Whitney. And then also the other participants in the room to see if they had any insights to share. If they didn't, that meant it was a great learning opportunity for everybody. Here's some language to keep in your back pocket if you're asked a question you can't answer. That's a good question that I don't know the answer to. Let's dig into that further in the future. Does anyone want to partner with me in putting together a future meeting around this topic? And then if that doesn't really work in your context for the CE experience you've developed, you could always adjust the script and offer to dig into the answer and follow up by email or through discussion boards. With that in mind, I want to introduce you to the #1 guiding principle of our workshop, psychological safety. It's a concept widely used in organizational research. It's commonly defined as feeling comfortable taking interpersonal risks, whether that's speaking up during a discussion, sharing an anecdote about a past experience, proposing a new idea, being open to constructive feedback. It's something we take very seriously. Our course really doesn't work without it because it's so interactive. And we don't just think about the psychological safety of our learners. We're also thinking about that as an instructor. So you should think about that for yourselves as well. A lot of our content is built on real experiences we've had. Often they're things that didn't go as well as we'd hoped. So there may be feelings of frustration or embarrassment, and we're offering them up for discussion to a large group. That's a vulnerable place to be. We try to lay the culture for that culture of psychological safety, foundation for that culture, by putting our own vulnerabilities on display and discussing the situation without ruminating or being overly self-critical. As the instructors share their real challenging situations, we encourage everyone to think positively about it, acknowledging what was done right and what we can learn from going forward. There's no shaming or judgmental comments, and then we continue to encourage that psychological safety and vulnerability throughout the sessions. We also have a code of conduct that we share with participants before they even register, and then again through Canvas as they're first starting out. And then we have an anonymous reporting form folks can use if they don't feel comfortable talking to us directly about something that they're concerned about. We encourage participants to get to know each other so that when they join into those discussions, including the online ones, they're thinking about the people behind the discussion and how the words might impact people's perceptions of themselves or what's being discussed. We almost never record anything that happens live, and we don't allow AI note takers. We don't want people to feel monitored as they're sharing real experiences. And because we don't allow these things, we make sure that we have detailed slide decks and other handouts to help support the learning so that those AI note takers aren't as necessary. We also ask for any accommodation requests in advance. So ultimately that could include a note taker if someone really needs it. And then similarly, if we have a chat transcript of a live event from Zoom, we're going to remove the participants' names from the record so that there's like that privacy and people don't feel as nervous sharing real experiences that they've had. Another guiding principle that we have is to respect and celebrate different levels of experience. We've noticed that this symposium is taking a very similar approach, and we feel right at home here. Our course participants are at many different experience levels, from folks who've co-authored many reviews to those who have never worked on an evidence synthesis team before. We try to encourage those with more experience to share their wealth of knowledge, how they might have encountered similar scenarios in the real world before. And then we also want people on the other end of the spectrum who are less experienced to feel comfortable asking those insightful questions and bringing valuable, fresh perspectives to the discussions. So it really all comes together to be such a great experience for everyone. And then now that I've set the stage with background information about our workshop, I'm going to hand things over to my colleague, Kate, to tell you more.
Hello. Thank you, Emily. So I'm going to talk about some of our different types of activities. So the first type is asynchronous activities that we ask all of our participants to submit via our learning management system, which we use Canvas at University of Michigan. These activities generally fall into three categories. One being discussions about participants' experiences or needs. Evaluating something. So it could be a tool, a resource, or sometimes we'll share articles with them. And then finally, developing a search or part of a search based on a topic prompt. Next slide, please. So here's one example of the first type of asynchronous activity. It's a discussion about experiences or needs. So in the first week of participating in the online portion of the course, we ask participants to reflect on what roles on systematic review teams are you currently prepared to take on? What roles are you interested in developing expertise in? And what support do you get from your institution to support this or pursue this expertise? We also ask them to read through other participants' responses and reply to at least one discussion post. These responses are valuable not just for us to make sure that we're aligning our content with the participants' interests, but we also see them like talking to one another, kind of noticing like similarities, encouraging one another, providing suggestions and advice. And so kind of participating as engaged, supportive members of the community that we're hoping to build through this course. Next slide. Here's an example of an asynchronous activity where we ask them to evaluate something. In this case, it's appraising a specific protocol published on Prospero. We ask them to read through the protocol and evaluate it, kind of putting them in a scenario like, if a team came to you and provided this protocol draft, and then asked you to collaborate with them. So that's kind of the scenario. And then we offer them some prompting questions to kind of think through how they would handle it or what they would do. So I didn't provide the specific Prospero record here, and we've provided a few different ones over the duration of the course, but it's not like a special case. It's nothing unique. And we just picked one that maybe had some problems, just so that there was stuff to notice and discuss. But there's all sorts of different types of protocols available on Prospero, so that was not difficult to find one. Next slide. This is another example of an asynchronous activity. So just before they join us for the in-person part of the course, we ask the participants to create a search strategy for a systematic review topic. And like through the whole online part of the course, we have several scaffolding activities to help them kind of build up this final search strategy. And so with this one, we're asking them to come up with a list of potential search terms for one concept. We've also provided some Sentinel articles for them to review. And then after they submit, they're able to see what other participants have posted and check against kind of other search terms that maybe they missed or ways to structure the search or search tricks. Next slide. And I'm going to share some reflections on what we've learned hosting these asynchronous learning activities. So these work great for activities where individuals need a little more time to read or explore or reflect. And so some participants can kind of read and think very quickly in a group environment, and they kind of have that quick answer. But other folks need a little more time to kind of process and focus and read and really kind of think about a response. And so you can also use, like in Canvas, our learning management system, there are settings on the back end that can kind of help you preserve the diversity of responses in a way that like a synchronous conversation can't. So for example, in Canvas, we use a setting that requires participants to make their first post before they're able to see other discussion posts. So that way it's kind of just their original thought that's being contributed. And again, we ask them to reply. And so a really good example for this particular scenario or format or modality is the protocol activity I just talked through. So we used to host this as a live activity during the in-person portion of the course. And actually, I think we used to even provide two protocols. And so we gave them, whatever, 20 minutes, 15 minutes to read through the protocols. But we found people got really, really stressed and like could not get through all the content, felt a lot of like time pressure. And there wasn't a lot of kind of original creative responses. It was typically like whoever was able to read through it first could respond. And then there was just kind of a lot of agreement, like, oh yeah, what they said during the reflection period. And so we shifted that to an online asynchronous assignment, and we found that that really allowed the participants to engage a little bit more with that particular activity. Some of the cons of these types of activities is that they're difficult to encourage and coordinate participation. So with so many distractions and work commitments, and responses will come in at all sorts of different times. Like if you're the first person that submits and you're like on the ball and you got it done like the first day the course or module opened, there's really nobody else for you to kind of respond to. And so it makes it a little bit tricky. And so are folks going to prioritize putting in the time to engage with the material and then post, and then they have to kind of remember to go back and engage with other people's posts later on. So it is a little bit challenging. Next slide. If you're interested in running this type of activity, here are some tips we have for you. Firstly, we recommend facilitating a sense of community. We have an introductory discussion board where we encourage people to share personal information. And again, we make sure to model that behavior. We model the level of detail that we're looking for by sharing our own introductory posts with pictures of pets and families and vacations and things. And we've noticed that not only do participants or introductory posts get more detailed in response, but the level of effort and warmth put into all asynchronous activities also seems to increase. Like people really like to get to know each other. So it's kind of a nice, warm, fuzzy part of doing this kind of workshop. And I've mentioned this before, but we also recommend encouraging discussion and learning from one another by expecting that they respond to at least one other person's post. But often we'll see people like instead of just getting the check for like I responded to one, you'll see actually there's a lot of engaging conversation that happens. Next slide, please. We also recommend incentivizing or encouraging participation by providing benefits. So, continuing education is a time commitment that takes away from other job responsibilities. So, you want to make it worth someone's while. And so, in our case, we provide 20 MLA credits for successful completion of all parts of the course, including both the asynchronous content and the in person content. However, there are other ways to incentivize participation for your own hands on continuing education activities. For example, if you're a supervisor, you could make sure that participation gets acknowledged in an annual review or promotion process. And if you're not a supervisor, maybe you could offer a certificate of participation or completion for the participant to share with their supervisor. Talk to your community, ask them what would be useful and what their supervisors might value. Also, you want to make sure to help protect time. If you're a supervisor, again, you have a little bit more influence on making sure that your supervisee has time during their work week to participate in learning activities. And if you're not, you can help facilitate finding an accountability buddy or setting up quiet co-working meetings for multiple participants to engage in asynchronous activities together. Our instructor team does a lot of co-working time together to prep for teaching this course. So we are very big fans of this option. Next slide, please. The rest of our activity types happen synchronously. This is one this one is real world scenarios as discussion prompts. We briefly describe something that happened in real life to someone in the co-instructor group or one of our colleagues, and then we ask our participants to reflect on what they would do in that scenario, either in pairs, small groups, or we do kind of like large group discussion also. And so like after the pair or group discussion, sometimes we'll do like a full group report out, kind of depending on how much time we have. Some people like to talk a lot. Sometimes people are very quiet. So we kind of make those changes as needed, depending on the vibe of the room. Next slide, please. And here's an example of one of those real world discussion prompts. So you've developed a search for a clinical team that assured you it was not a systematic review request. Months later, they reach out asking you to write the search methods for their systematic review manuscript. How do you handle this situation? And this is absolutely one that happened to one of our colleagues. Next slide, please. And here is another scenario. Your only contact with the team is a student or a research assistant, and all communication goes through them. The team lead won't answer your questions and only says to ask the student or assistant. How do you handle this? Again, this is something that has happened to one of us, so it's a real world example. Next slide, please. So if you're interested in writing your own scenarios, we've got some tips for you. So one, keep it as true to life as possible. These could be very common situations that your colleagues have encountered, best for less experienced participants. Or you could provide kind of less common situations, which might be better for more experienced participants. In our workshop, we do tend to provide a mix of both, given we have kind of a wide range of experience across our participants. Two, remove extraneous or highly specific details. It's typically not important to share names, the team's disciplinary area, subject matter of the review, or things like dates. This helps with point three, which is keep it short. We aim for 1 to 2 short paragraphs because very, very long scenarios might work better for like an asynchronous activity, again, where they have the time to read through and reflect. And four, ask open-ended questions. We typically prompt with things like, what would you do? Or if you've experienced this before, how did you handle it? And so now I will hand it over to, I think Letitia's taken over now.
Thanks, Kate. Okay, so now we're going to think about how we organize the discussions of these scenarios. I really like pair or small group discussions because they can be a great way for participants to engage who are shy or quiet or lower in confidence. They don't need to speak up in front of the full crowd until after they've shared and gotten reassurance on their ideas from one or more of their buddies. It can also really encourage connection between participants, as many people people may be more likely to share interpersonal details in a small group setting than a large one. However, it does have some cons. Logistics are much more complex. Before the in-person part of our workshop, we always spend at least an hour setting up tables and talking through how we should organize our room, what size the small groups is, what size of the small groups would be best, how can we comfortably set up our tables and chairs to encourage connection, and should those groups be stable or moving around the room? It's also tough to manage timing. Interrupting conversations is awkward, whether you're waiting for a lull in the conversation or setting timers that beep. These types of conversations can also take longer than large group discussions because they've got two parts, the initial conversation and then the report out to the full group. Next slide. Thanks. Large group discussions are the reverse of these pros and cons. It's easier to tailor the length and depth of the conversation. You can easily cut it off if it's running too long. As facilitator, you can directly respond to each participant's comment, which helps keep things on track if they start getting off topic. And any room setup will work for this. For the cons, you may find certain participants dominate the conversation, and I know we encounter this in various settings. And the quieter participants don't engage actively. There may be less diversity of ideas, as people may be less likely to disagree with the first one or two speakers. And there's less time to get to know one another and less comfort in sharing personal details. Next slide, thanks. Now we can move on to the activity type number 3, the carousel activity. This activity engages participants in structured reflection and discussion through a series of rotating stations. The main components of the activity are having multiple stations containing materials, questions, or scenarios for participants to evaluate and reflect upon, having sticky notes and pins, that will be used to record and share ideas and feedback and observations. And then content that each station will, that differs slightly while remaining comparable across stations. And then finally, participant rotation between stations to review and respond to each topic or prompt. During the in-person session of the workshop, the participants examine the methods sections from 5 published reviews. Each method section is displayed on poster paper and around the room, and each table of participants is considered one group. And each group is allotted 3 minutes at each station in order to stay within our time constraints for the workshop. As they move through the stations, they take a few moments to read each method section and reflect on the quality and completeness of the reporting. They consider what is done well, what information is missing, and how the reporting could be improved. As they review comments left by others, they're also instructed to add +1s to ideas they agree with or build on previous observations with additional insights. These observations and questions are recorded on sticky notes and are placed directly on the poster. After sharing their feedback, they rotate to the next station and repeat the process. Next slide, thank you. Like any instructional activity, the carousel has both strengths and limitations. One of its biggest advantages is that it allows for mostly anonymous participation. Participants can share ideas, observations, and critiques without having to speak up in front of the entire group. And this can encourage contributions from individuals who may be less comfortable participating in a traditional discussion. And the activity also promotes interaction as participants can build on one another's comments and see a range of perspectives emerge over time. In an in-person setting, the opportunity to stand up, move around the room, and engage with different stations can help maintain energy and attention. There are also some challenges to consider. Because participants typically spend only a limited amount of time at each station, some of them may feel rushed or pressured to read and respond quickly. Facilitators should think carefully about the complexity and amount of content included at each station. And also for our in-person sessions, there are practical considerations such as the cost and time required to print posters or handouts. There are also accessibility things to consider, whether posters are positioned at an appropriate height, whether the text is large enough to read comfortably, and whether there's sufficient space around each station for all participants to move and engage comfortably. Okay. Now I'll cover our 4th and final activity type, the search project. We ask participants to craft a search based on known Sentinel articles that we share in advance. And once they submit their assignment, we test each search against a set of other relevant articles that they don't know in advance. This gives us the opportunity to reflect as a group where were any of these relevant articles missed, and if so, can we figure out why? Next slide. I'm not going to spend any time talking about this because this activity is actually publicly shared. If you haven't already, I strongly recommend you check out the Library Systematic Review Search Set website. And if you're interested in learning more about these activities, I recommend watching the recordings of 2 webinars hosted via our Tallman Library Talks free webinar series. I've included the links in the slide that you'll have access to. And that's all we have for now. Thank you so much for your attention. And thank you so much for the LESS organizers for having us. And we look forward to your questions and comments during the upcoming Q&A period.